All right. Need to do this?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, this one's on. Trying to use this one.
That one's on? Is this on? Oh,
Yeah.
there's just no light action, so I couldn't tell. Okay, you guys ready? Do I have to hit the gavel to get us started? Okay. Good afternoon. I am Portland City Councilor Dan Ryan. Welcome to the fourth Portland Children's Levy Allocation meeting of 2025. Boy, that just made the year go fast. I'm joined by committee colleagues today in person. We have Charity Kreider right here to my right, and we have Dan Floyd right over here. He's a community representative. And we have Megan Moyer, Commissioner, Multnomah County Commissioner Megan Moyer online. Thank you, Megan, for being with us today. And unfortunately, we will be missing our outstanding county appointed member, Felicia Tripp. I'm also joined by the remarkable Levy staff, Erica, Joel, John, Meg, Lisa, Katrina, Brian, Yusheng. Wow, you're all here. Thank you very much for being here and joining us today. Now, on to our agenda. First up, we always get to look at the minutes. The last meeting was on June 18th, 2025. I will seek a motion to approve the minutes from either of my colleagues. Is that you, Dan?
So moved.
Yeah, there you go.
Second.
All right. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And I think that does it. Okay, minutes have been approved. On to the next item. And the next item is small grants. I looked right up at Erica for that. So we'll first have an echo that needs to go away. Is the echo going away? It is, yay. First item is Director Pellegrino, who will review the funding allocations for the upcoming small grants funding round. Lisa, welcome to the podium with Erica.
I know, I thought I did. Yep, there we go. Okay, there's no light. It really is. How do I know if it's on? I don't want to yell into it. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you. Megan, nice to see you too on screen. Appreciate everybody joining us. Okay, so for the first, Erica's going to be doing the lion's share of explaining what's going on with small grants, so you'll get a good tour through that. But before that, we need to vote on an additional allocation to the small grants fund. So in June of 2024, the allocation committee allocated projected resources for the 3-year period FY26 through FY28, and that included the large grant funding round that we just finished, the community child care initiative grant that was made, the small grants, and training for PCL grantees over that 3-year period, FY26 through FY28. Funding for the small grants fund was allocated as follows. You allocated $437,000 to cover the final year of the current small grants, which is the current fiscal year we are in right now, FY26, plus $1 million for new small grants round to cover that for 27 and 28, for FY27 and 28. So this was done in June of 24 when we were projecting forward. So in June of 25, 4 of the 7 small grantees were awarded large grants beginning July 1, 2025. Those awards terminated their small grants, okay, and left a balance of $260,000 in the small grants fund because we're not going to be spending that money since they have now transitioned to large grants. So staff is recommending that we allocate that balance to the new small grants fund round that will start this fall. And we also recommend allocating an additional $240,000 to the small grants fund round to bring the total funding for the 3-year small grants round to $1.5 million. And so those the new small grants will begin July 1, 26. Okay, so it's not quite a year from now, like 9 months, I guess. And what allows us to recommend that allocation is that the underspending on large grant budgets for FY25, so that's the fiscal year that just closed, was slightly higher. So there was slightly more underspending than we had projected when we projected our resources forward in June of 24, and that will cover that additional $240,000 that you allocate to the small grants fund. So that's our recommendation, to fill it out so we have $1.5 million in funding. I know that's a lot of years and a lot of fiscals and a lot of dates thrown around, so happy to take questions if I've not been clear for anybody.
I think I tracked it, but when I heard the last item of the underspending, that seemed to really filled up the delta, so that brought us to the whole amount.
Yes, exactly. I mean, we do our best to project as accurately as we can, but we also tend to be conservative, so we don't count on having more resources so that we give more away than we are likely to have. But, we're always trying to get that just right, and
So we're
we were
not
slightly.
finding new money as opposed to we're reallocating based on promotion, if you will, or the award of a large grant and then some underspending that was clear to us now. And those two totals bring us to this number.
Yes, exactly. That's the 1.5 million. So that's our
Any
recommendation.
more discussion? Do we need to vote on this?
Yes, you do.
Okay. Megan, I can see you right now. Hi, Megan. Commissioner Moyer, do you have anyone have any questions before we move on to, would you like us to vote on that now?
I think it would make sense because Erica will also need you to vote on the approving the small grants application because we need to publish that. So that's,
So this
we want
does
to get
make
your input.
sense sequentially. Okay.
I think it would be easier.
There's no other questions. We can move a motion to approve the staff recommendation of moving this allocation amount to 1.5 million, correct? Okay,
Is that
that's the motion.
okay?
Okay,
Second.
and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 And that's all of us. So that is unanimous 4-0. I heard
Did you
Commissioner
hear
Moyer
Megan? I did not hear Megan.
Aye.
Okay.
3 times
Now I
now.
hear you. Okay.
All right, that
Great,
passes.
thanks. All right, I'll let Erica take it away because she has the lion's share of this presentation.
Welcome, Erica.
Thank you, Councilor Ryan. Okay, we're on the next slide now. Can you all hear me? Is my mic the way it's supposed to be? Okay. So the Small Grants Fund was launched in 2020 in response to findings of PSU's review of our grant-making process and feedback from the 2019-2020 community engagement process, which was led by Empress Rules Consulting. The purpose of the Small Grants Fund is to increase access for smaller organizations to PCL funding and strengthen their capacity to serve children, youth, and families. Next slide. In 2020, staff worked with an ad hoc committee of community members with lived and professional experience of PCL's program areas to create the application process based on feedback from small organizations. They helped staff to develop a 2-step process. Step 1 was a brief written application, and then a portion of applicants were selected to move to the second step, which was a more detailed written application, a grant budget, and an interactive component. The interactive component was intended to help organizations share about their work and reduce barriers in a written-only process. However, due to the pandemic, staff and reviewers held virtual interviews as the interactive component with selected applicants. Although this was the first time launching the Small Grants Fund, PCL received 31 applications requesting $4.4 million in funding. That's $4 for every $1 available. 7 grants were approved by the Allocation Committee and City Council for $1 million. Overall, the Small Grants Fund has been successful in building capacity for small organizations. 6 of 7 Small Grants Funds grantees met the eligibility requirements and applied for a large grant in 2024-25, and 4 of the 6 were awarded large grants in a highly competitive funding round, indicating increased grant writing skills, increased fiscal management skills, and strong performance in small grants. Based on staff experience and feedback from applicants and reviewers, we have listed here key strengths and suggested improvements. Among the strengths are an application with both a written portion and an interactive portion. This gives applicants different opportunities to communicate their work. A short, easy to complete written application that didn't overburden small organizations, and community reviewers' involvement in both scoring and recommending applications helped staff to integrate community voice into the funding recommendations. Among the suggested improvements were including an interactive component with all applicants, along with written application. In 2020, only applicants selected to move to the second step participated in virtual interviews due to the constraints of the pandemic. Also, to consider including visual or storytelling elements to the application other than interviews. Scheduling 2 reviewers, PCL staff, and applicants for interviews was difficult, and a few applicants and reviewers indicated the interview format itself wasn't optimal. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the changes in eligibility. In 2020, nonprofit organization applicants were eligible with an annual revenue in their last closed fiscal year of between $10,000 and $1 million. Based on staff's experience with the first cohort of small grants, organizations with annual revenues below $90,000 may not have the organizational infrastructure to manage the requirements of a 3-year city grant. Organizations with revenues between $90,000 and $750,000 will benefit the most from the capacity building opportunities available in the Small Grants Fund. Organizations below the $90,000 threshold are still eligible to receive a $500 event sponsorship from PCL if they have not received one from PCL in the past. And then this is just a reminder that organizations with annual revenues above that $750,000 mark were eligible to apply for PCL's recent large grants, and they did. As you may recall, the act governing PCL limits an organization to receiving no more than 30% of its revenues from PCL. This 30% policy guides the minimum and maximum grant amounts for the Small Grants Fund based on organizational revenues. The minimum annual, so just for 1 year, grant is $30,000, and the minimum 3-year grant is $90,000. The maximum annual grant is $80,000, and the maximum 3-year grant is $240,000. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the application. This slide outlines the application draft we provided for your review. Given lessons learned from the 2020 Small Grants Fund round, this application will have 2 components, as we've talked about, for all applicants to do. The first will be a short written application worth 48 points, and the second, a video component worth 28 points. This approach allows PCL to honor applicant feedback to provide visual storytelling element for all applicants. Organizations will apply in web grants, the city's online grant system. Staff focus on keeping the application short to limit barriers for applicants. We adapted and simplified a set of questions and scoring criteria developed by PCL's Community Council for the large grants process. So in what you see above, in step 1, there will be an eligibility screening to ensure the organization is a 501c3 nonprofit and serves children and families in Portland. In step 2, applicants will upload their annual organization-wide budget for their fiscal year and financial statements for the most recent closed fiscal year. In step 3, applicants will provide key details, including a 1-paragraph summary of their program, demographics of their board and staff, and select a PCL program area and funding priority addressed by the proposed program. Those are just selected from a drop-down menu. It's pretty easy. Applicants in step 4 will indicate their 1-year and 3-year requested grant amount. And then step 5, they're going to upload a narrative that answers questions about their organization's mission, program design, outcomes, and experience serving the population that they proposed and operating the proposed program, and a budget narrative. Then finally, in step 6, they will be submitting a link to a basic 5-minute video answering 3 questions. Videos can be recorded on a mobile device with a plain background. We've just advised them to minimize noise and shaking. And PCL's Community Council advised on questions for the video component. We'll also allow videos to be submitted in languages other than English, and we can submit them for translation. Okay, So I just walked you through the application. So now we'll look at the funding process steps. Okay.
I think I'm on again. Am I on again? Okay. When I was looking at your qualifications, so the minimum is 90,000 a year,
Yes.
and then the minimum award is 30K per year.
Yes.
If I did my math right, I think we might have to play with those numbers a bit because 30% of 90 is 27,000. So that's less than 30K.
Right. So we did 3 times, so that would have been 33% instead of 30 is what you're saying. So we can adjust that.
I saw the math the same. I just figured it was up to 30%, but in some case, but the max is 240. So for a larger organization, the small grants, it may be that their max would be 26 or 27%. So I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I
it may be
was just
neither.
trying to make sure we didn't get in cahoots later on.
Yeah.
John, you on this?
Yeah.
Okay. I understand basic arithmetic.
right, though.
Once we get past that, I'm not good, but this one I
Okay.
can do the math.
Got it.
All right, thanks.
I just have a question, and let me know if you're going to go into detail later. So, and we'll cover it. But on the narrative section, and you described what they need to provide, just because it came up in the past as a barrier with reporting requirements, is that part going to be the expectations for that, or how they do that part of the narrative, or is that later on in the process?
So what are your questions about like, is there a specific question that you're
Yeah,
saying?
of how they will track and show progress towards goals and objectives related to the work that they're doing.
So they do write some of the information. First of all, the reporting for small grantees tends to be a lot more simple than for large grantees because since they have less money, there's just less that they can pay for and that they can do
Right.
with it. But yes, information from the narrative and will be used to help make reporting. But in both processes, we'll go through and negotiate and kind of tweak things and make adjustments that are needed once we get to the contracting process if they're chosen for an award.
Thank you.
Does that answer?
It does.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, are we ready to go to the next section? Or are there further questions?
Here, Christian Moyer. When when the slide shows on, just know I can't see you, so you'll have to just speak up if you have a question.
No question.
Thanks.
Okay. Then moving on to the process that we will use to make the decisions. As I noted on the previous slide, applicants will apply through the city's web grant system. So they'll provide both the short written application and the video. The funding priorities staff will use will be the same funding priorities for the small grants round that were used in the large grants round. As you may recall, these funding priorities were created by the Community Council and the Allocation Committee in spring 2024, based on the community engagement results reported by Camille E. Trummer, LLC. We have been doing we've been working on outreach. PCL staff have continually updated a small grants outreach list of small organizations that serve children, families, and youth in PCL program areas. Funding announcements will be sent to small organizations on the list, the general PCL mailing list, posted on the website and social media, and shared with Community Council and Allocation Committee members to share with their networks. Then staff will host 2 applicant information sessions virtually at the end of October for applicants to learn about the application and funding process and to be able to ask questions directly from staff. We will post a recorded presentation of the info session materials on the PCL website, and applicants will be able to email staff with questions. Staff will respond to applicants and share the questions and answers weekly on PCL's website for transparency and support for all applicants. On the next slide, I'll walk you through steps and timelines after applications are due. Okay, so just as I described, we hope to open the application on October 15th with applications due on December 1st. So I'll walk you through the steps after applications are due. To continue prioritizing community voice, Community Council will review and score all video application submissions. PCL staff will train Community Council members in small group meetings during the first 2 weeks of December. Staff will review and score all written applications. Each applicant will receive 3 scores: the median score from their written application, the median score for their video submission, and their total score. Staff will create draft recommendations for Community Council consideration, and they will meet in late February 2026 to discuss and finalize funding recommendations for the Allocation Committee's decision. Staff will send funding recommendations to applicants the week of March 3rd, and applicants will have 2 weeks to submit written testimony in response to recommendations. The Allocation Committee will have approximately 4 weeks to review the funding recommendations and 2 weeks to review the written testimony. Also, staff will provide the Allocation Committee with access to all videos submitted with the applications, and we can provide those as early as mid-December 2025. Staff plan to schedule Allocation Committee meetings to meet in April 2026 to make funding decisions. We hope to send the committee's funding decisions to City Council in mid-April to mid-May, and staff will make every effort to present Allocation Committee's decisions to City Council as early as possible in the spring to avoid coinciding with city budget hearings. Then grants will begin on July 1st.
Just on the, maybe you skipped this.
Yeah.
Grant negotiations, can you define what that means?
Grant negotiations, so after the award has been approved, then we meet with grantees to set up their contract, all of the parameters of the contract. And that's the time that, as Charity was mentioning, like if there's things, sometimes it's a little bit unclear, okay, what is the exact deliverable here from the narrative? So we'll be clarifying that and making sure that everything is clear going into, it's a service table and all of the things that reporting will be based on.
Thank you.
And if I could just comment, I absolutely, totally trust your process and expertise into all those details. Sometimes it just helps me understand as I'm reviewing, what to look for and what I should be expecting to have concerns about and bring up. I just want to know, I want to reiterate how well I think you do in this process. And I'm learning so much, and I appreciate your patience as we kind of go through all the details.
Thank you. We appreciate trust in our staff expertise. And it is a very detailed process. The last little thing I would like to walk you through is feedback that we have received so far about the application from potential small grants applicants. So between August 28th and September 18th, staff emailed a draft of small grants application questions and scoring criteria 3 times to 50 people at over 40 small organizations. It was a brief feedback survey, which included the draft application and scoring criteria. And the survey asked 4 Likert scale questions about whether respondents understood the questions and the scoring criteria, whether questions and criteria are reasonable for each part of the application, and respondents could provide narrative feedback as well on questions and criteria. Only 9 people responded to the survey, but they all agreed that they understood the questions and scoring criteria for both the written and video parts of the application. And all respondents agreed the questions and scoring criteria were reasonable for the written application. 8 of 9 agreed the video portion questions and scoring criteria were reasonable, and 1 was neutral. 3 respondents wrote narrative comments that indicated positive support for application questions and scoring criteria. So I'm happy to take any further questions or facilitate you through discussion and voting on whether to support the process, the timeline, and the application.
Yeah, my question, thank you, Erica, that was really complete. I'm sure when you got 9 responses, you were hoping for more. What follow-ups did you do to try to get that number up? And why do you think the number was lower than usual? And then my assumption is they were all current awardees.
No,
it wasn't.
So
Is that
they're
right?
all people who may not have had prior connection to PCL. So they're potential small organizations that haven't received funding from us for the most part. There might have been one, no. Yeah, Meg can speak a little bit more to the survey.
I guess having more understanding of who responded and who did not would be helpful.
Sure. Is this, am I on now? Yeah. So over the last year, we've been keeping, well, actually over the past several years, keeping track of smaller organizations that haven't had a Levy small grant in the past. And we have an internal spreadsheet that we use to keep track of those, and we've added folks. And then through the sponsorship opportunities that we provide to small organizations, so that's, or any organization that hasn't had Levy funding in the past is working in our program areas and serving children and families in Portland, they can apply for a $500 event sponsorship. And we do those twice a year. So that is a rich way for us to get more information about organizations working in our community that we don't have another kind of grant relationship with. So that is what comprises that outreach list.
I stand corrected. It was actually an outreach.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
an outreach
And
list.
here I
And
thought it was more those that we've already been working with.
no, you're going to hear more about those. We have a whole set of slides for that next. But so that outreach list, like Erica said, had about 50 people on it and 40 different organizations that have never had a Levy grant before. They may have had a $500 event sponsorship, but they've never been in a grant relationship with us. And so we sent out the draft small grants application to them. In an ideal world, we would have tried to do some kind of community conversation because that is Erica's style and way that she does her work. But we have been pressed for time to get our current grants negotiated and to keep this entire funding process on track. And so one of the ways that we decided to expedite things was to send a survey out to folks, send them the draft application, and just give them an opportunity to chime in if they wanted to. Does this stuff make sense? Does it seem reasonable? And I don't know how to explain the small number of respondents other than people are busy and, it's a little bit of
Explained
free
it by-
labor.
You explained it by letting me know exactly who was the audience.
Yeah.
Got it.
I think if there was one additional information, it would be to see who that list was for both
Sure.
us and for the community oversight advisory team. So then there could be organizations that we could then notice that aren't on there.
We could easily get that all to you after this meeting and to our community council, particularly if there are organizations that you want to make sure are on that list
Yeah.
that haven't had Levy funds before and that have youth.
This is an edit to make it even, this is good, and we're just like an add-on.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a great suggestion. I would just say, keep in mind the organization size limits. So organizations with annual revenues last year under 750. I mean, you may not know, but you might have a good sense. So, but yeah, we can forward that list to you all and to our community council too.
Yeah, I would absolutely be fine with that. Have talked with some other, like I talked with my colleague at PSEF to see if they had recommendations. They've added a few organizations to the list, so we've been doing outreach as much as we can at the city level, but I love that idea. Any other questions? Nope. Okay. Then that completes, and you can vote on the application
Process.
the application materials and process.
Well, I really appreciate that presentation. It was very thorough. Those dates are coming up much sooner than I realized, and so that was good for me to figure out how we can improve upon the dialogue between this committee and the rest of City Council. We obviously had some opportunities to learn how important that is. And that's me saying you did a fine job. But I just want to make sure that I'm cognizant of those deadlines coming up. So it's not so compressed, as you said, into the budget process where the attention spans were quite limited from some of my colleagues. And so I want to make sure that I work with you, especially with that audience. Yeah. Any other suggestions, comments before we go on to approve the staff's process? Is Megan, Commissioner Moyer, your hand is up, literally. Take it away.
I have a question related to the percentage of the funding for an organization that this can be the 30% cap. Does that have to be like cash they already have, or can they be applying for other grants? I'm wondering where, like, when we evaluate, is it like you've already gotten however much and this would only add 30% funding, or can they be in the process of trying to get other funds?
Do you want to take? Okay. Wait.
The 30% is based on their last closed fiscal year. So they won't be actively pursuing grants in the last closed fiscal year. Those should be wrapped up and recorded in their financial statements. And so the easiest way for us to have a clear 30% definition is to look at that last closed fiscal year. So it's true that an organization could be applying and could be already in a different financial position, but we are going to look back in order to treat everyone sort of the same at the same period of time and accounting. Does that answer your question, Commissioner?
Yep.
Erica, was there anything you wanted to add?
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Great.
So,
Anyone else? No? Okay, I think we've had a thorough discussion, and I am asking if anyone has a motion to approve the process of the staff's small grants
All motion.
submissions and how they're, the way that we're engaging with the community. This entire process was very thorough. We heard the whole report. Any, Moyer, Commissioner Moyer? But did you want me to ask her
Oh,
a
I
quick
meant,
question?
yeah, I was just making a motion to adopt.
Oh, Commissioner Moyer, we can't hear you. That's it. So I didn't know you were talking.
Oh, I was just making a motion.
Oh, great. Can you do it one more time? I think you were muted.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I'd like to make a motion to adopt the process laid out by staff.
Second.
And it's been seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Bye.
Okay, it moves on. Thank you so much, Erica, for your thorough work. It's been approved. Next, we have item number 2, which is a preliminary reflections on large grant funding round. And we have Meg, who has come up to the podium. And that's all I have here for, I'll take it away, Meg.
And Katrina will be joining me as well. I will be doing a piece of this, and she'll be doing a piece
If
as well.
that was the next one or this one.
And I just wanted to clarify, thanks again, Councilor Ryan, for your clarification on the math. We have noted that, and we'll make sure it's integrated into the materials. So we have a practice as a staff of doing a process improvement reflection period after each of our funding rounds. We gather feedback from the folks involved, so applicants, reviewers. We as a staff sit down and try to make sense of things, and we invite the allocation committee each time to reflect and recommend changes for our future process. This time around, we surveyed applicants and reviewers, and then also with our community council being new to our process this year, we convened them in July, and Katrina did a post-meeting evaluation with them and then did follow-up one-to-one interviews with each member of our community council. So taken together, we have a lot of quantitative and qualitative data from different audiences who participated in our recent funding process, and we are going to present some of the preliminary results from the quantitative data in the applicant survey and reviewer survey, and some of the qualitative preliminary data from the Community Council. We have a lot more qualitative data in the surveys to dig into, and we have not had time to put that together yet. We will publish a full report once we get through all the data on this. And in the meantime, we'll be connecting with you all individually to make sure that we can hear from you about your experience in this process, including your reflections on this outside of this meeting, and collectively represent your feedback as well in that product. And we usually publish those on our website. So for today, as we go through these data, I'm hoping that you all will think about these questions. What questions or curiosity do these data that we are going to share raise for you? And how do the data compare to your experience of the funding round? So like I said, again, we'll talk today somewhat, but we also anticipate scheduling individual time with each of you to dig more into all of this. So first I'll start with the reviewer survey. We did an online anonymous survey with a handful of Likert scale quantitative questions and one open-ended question asking reviewers about their experience and specific elements of their experience. And then we also asked some optional demographic questions in that survey. You may recall we had 91 reviewers, and we sent this survey out, and 44 of them responded. We had the survey open for about 7 weeks, and we sent a series of reminders. So a 48% response rate, which is pretty good for a survey. As you can see in the pie graph, the largest portion of reviewer survey respondents identify as Black, Indigenous, and people of color. A smaller group identified as white, and 20% did not respond to the demographic questions at all. 18% identified as having a disability, and 20% identified as LGBTQ+, but also keep in mind that we're missing data from about 20% of respondents. Big picture, 98% of reviewers strongly agreed or agreed that being a reviewer was positive experience and process. So along those lines, in the next few slides, you will see that the results generally reflect their positive experience. So one of the first things that we asked in the survey was around the training and staff support that we offered to reviewers. So that's what this slide focuses on. Nearly all reviewers said that they received the support that they needed from staff to do their reviews, and that the training that we offered to them helped them understand their role as a reviewer. In general, reviewers said that the online folder that we offered them with all of their applications to score was easy to use, and that the training helped them understand how to review applications. You can see on the slide, the blue bars are the agree and strongly agree with these statements. The gray is the neutral, and the yellow is disagree and strongly disagree. And that color convention will carry throughout all of these, so you'll be able to make sense of them. So in general, like I said, folks said that training and staff support was strong, and there were a couple of folks who felt neutral. So this is where we'll start to look at the qualitative comments of what people said and see where we can learn some insights about how to do better next time. And those gray sections and yellow sections will get bigger on different elements of this process as well. So we'll look at that. On the next set of questions, we asked reviewers about the application questions themselves, like how well the questions help them understand facets of the application. So we asked how well it helped them understand the program services that applicants wanted to offer, how well it helped them understand applicants' commitment to racial equity, diversity, and inclusion, and how well it helped them understand the organizations themselves. So again, as you can see, over 90% of the reviewer respondents said that they agree all of those things worked for them. And there were small numbers who were either neutral or disagreed. So again, this will be a place where we look into the qualitative comments to understand a little bit more. Finally, and this is the last slide I will share on reviewers' perspective, we asked them about the score forms that they used and the scoring criteria. And this is an area where their feedback suggests that we have more room for improvement. And this is certainly where we will dig into the qualitative data and see what kind of comments reviewers made to help us understand their feedback. Most reviewers felt like the criteria and the score forms helped them assess applicants' commitment to racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. And they felt like the score forms were generally easy to use in the online web grant system that the city now uses for grants management and applications. 77% of reviewers thought that the criteria and score forms were effective to evaluate applications overall. 16% were neutral and 7% disagreed. So when you compare that result to the top bar, where 89% said that the criteria were helpful to assess applicants' commitment to racial equity, diversity, and inclusion, there's a difference there. And so using the comments to try to understand what is driving the difference will be a key place that we look. Why is it that for one particular element, the criteria were helpful, but in general, people felt less so? Any questions on the reviewer results before I move into applicants? Okay, great. All right, so now we'll look at some preliminary data from the applicant survey. So similar to the reviewer survey, we asked applicants questions about their experience in different parts of the process, and we used Likert scale quantitative questions for those, along with 2 open-ended questions, one that asked areas of strength in our process and areas of dissatisfaction in our process. And again, we asked optional demographic questions. 79 people responded to the anonymous survey that we offered, which we had open for only 4 weeks. We were a little bit more pressed for time, but we did send several reminders. Because the responses are anonymous, we don't know exactly how many of these 79 people are represented across applications and organizations that applied, but we have some estimated response rates. So there were 110 organizations that submitted applications. So these 79 people may represent 72% of the organizations. We received 168 applications, so the 79 people may represent 47% of the applications. And then this survey was sent to 172 individuals that were associated with the applications in our online web grants system, or who had been asked to be added to all of our communications about the application process. And the 79 people are 46% of those individuals that received the survey. And here are some demographics that help us understand who responded a little bit more. The majority of respondents had a funded application. Just for context and reminder, 56% of the applications submitted were funded. So this pool may include more than one person responding from funded applications or from funded organizations. 61% of the respondents were a PCL grantee or said they were a PCL grantee in the fiscal year 25 before this funding process, and 39% were not. Just a reminder that 45% of the total applications that we from organizations did not have a PCL grant in fiscal year 25. Nearly 1/3 of the respondents chose not to share their race, ethnicity identity. From those who did, 30% identified as Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and 38% identified as white. Because we had such a large group of folks who didn't share that information, I do want to caution us on how we interpret it. And I'll just add that for folks who did share this information, 16% identified as having a disability and 25% identified as LGBTQ+.
Can I ask a quick, any thoughts on why that, given the nature of the grant and the focus and the commitment to providing services to these communities, why folks aren't responding to that demographic information? Or it's just a mystery and maybe more qualitative data will point to that? And
I don't think the qualitative data will, because it was the demographic piece of the survey was open-ended. It was, how do you identify? I suspect, this is just, I think a lot of times people don't share information that could be identifying out of fear of being identified. And because many of them did write open-ended comments, and some of them wrote several things, both strengths and areas of dissatisfaction. Some only wrote strengths, some only wrote areas. I suspect they just don't want to have any way for us to identify them. And since we were already asking, did you have a grant before? Was your application funded? By the time you get to those optional questions, they may have just decided they would rather not offer any more information that could identify them in there, especially, I mean, as a funder to partner relationship, I mean, I just think there's probably concern about their privacy and wanting to keep it really anonymous. So, do you want to chime in on that at all, Katrina? Okay. Any of my colleagues want to? Okay. Does that answer your question, Charity? Okay. All right, so moving on to some of the preliminary results. So big picture, a majority of the respondents for the applicant survey said that they thought the process reflected a commitment to increasing access and opportunity for children and families in Portland communities experiencing inequities. Some were neutral on that, and over 20% disagreed. So this is, like I was saying, where we're going to want to dig more into the qualitative comments and understand for the folks who were dissatisfied and neutral, sort of what they had to say about that, and also what the folks who were satisfied had to say. So we asked applicants about the support that they were offered and the review process. The majority of respondents thought that the application materials on our website helped them prepare their application and that the info sessions that we offered were helpful, although 22% were neutral about the info session. So we are curious about what it was about them that could be improved. 78% thought it was helpful that we provided them with reviewer scores before they had to submit testimony to you all about their applications. The majority thought that engaging community volunteers to score applications helped bring community voice into our funding process. However, 25% were neutral about that and 10% disagreed. This is an area where, again, looking at the qualitative data will be helpful. But I will just say we as a staff have talked a little bit about some of these dynamics even before we had the survey results in, because we're aware of where people have already begun to raise, sort of feedback to us, either in grant negotiations or just our own experience. So for example, we saw score variation between reviewers on a single application, and we have heard concerns as we've done grant contract negotiations from some grantees that was troublesome for them. So I expect that there will be some of that in the comments and the data as well. We've heard that feedback in the past. It's a typical dynamic of working with community reviewers. So one way we've always tried to mitigate that is by having a number of reviewers review the same application and taking, a median score to help reduce the impact of outliers. And of course, we used other decisions besides only score to help make decisions. But still, I think score variation is an area that may be affecting the neutral responses for that question. So we also asked applicants how they felt about or their experience with our communication throughout the process. The majority said that we communicated with them clearly about the funding process and timeline, that they understood the information that we were providing to explain our recommendations, and that we reduced favoritism by not allowing applicants to have direct contact with us while the funding process was operating. But you can see on this slide that there are people who disagreed with those statements. Before we sent out the survey, again, we had started to discuss internally ways to improve how we as a staff communicate with applicants around funding recommendations. We have a handful of ideas that we've started to discuss. And one example is offering each applicant a much more thorough written explanation of our recommendations specific to their application and within the context of all the other applications in the program area. So they would get a little bit more specific information walking out of the process than just understanding a broad brush guide of how we approached things and what a short narrative on each recommendation in the program area. Again, we'll look at what folks wrote in their qualitative comments, but just wanted to share that we've started to kind of think about these things internally as well. Nearly 1/4 of respondents were neutral about whether limiting staff contact with applicants helped minimize favoritism. So this is definitely an area where we want to understand more in the qualitative comments, what folks' concerns were, and what suggestions they have for how we could do things differently. And this is my last slide on applicant survey results. And this one focuses on the allocation committee phases in the funding process. So the majority of respondents understood the process that was used to facilitate the committee's decisions on April 23rd. But nearly 1/4 of them did not, and some were neutral. So again, we're going to try to see what they had to say in their qualitative comments, but you all might have some ideas about that since you lived it as well. The majority of applicant respondents said that they understood the rationale that the committee members used to make their decisions, though 30% disagreed with that statement. The majority of applicants agree that it was better to have written or audio or video testimony provided to you all instead of having to come to a public meeting and provide oral testimony. As you can see, 28% were neutral about that. That's the biggest group of neutral responses to any of the applicant survey questions. But I want to remind everybody that I think it was almost 40% of our applicants had never been through this process before. And so they were not here in prior years when the committee used to take public testimony as part of its decision-making meetings. We moved to doing written audio and video testimony in response to past applicants' feedback, unfunded and funded applicants' feedback. So it'll be interesting to see what folks said in their written comments about the trade-offs between oral testimony and written video and audio testimony. Katrina also asked the community council a little bit about that testimony question, and she'll share their feedback here shortly. Before I turn it over to her, are there any questions that you all had on the applicant survey results so far?
Yes. When you keep referencing the qualitative data, when will you review that, and then what's the process for sharing it with this group?
Yes, there were over 50 respondents to the applicant survey who wrote comments, and so it's a matter of trying to theme the comments and then double check your theming and distill them into findings, especially as they pertain to some of these issues where we want to dig in further. We're hoping to accomplish that this month. I also really want to meet with you all individually once we've dug into that a little bit more to share more about what we've heard and get some of your thoughts on it. I think you all have your own independent thoughts as well, having lived through the process of ways that you probably think things could be done differently and better. So trying to kind of bring all of those streams of feedback together into a more full report, and we're working on that this month, Dan. And the trade-off for us right now is balancing getting this done as quickly as we can and trying to wrap up finalizing all of our current contracts and budgets so that folks can invoice us by the end of this month, because first quarter has ended and we want to make sure they're in position for that. But so far we're on track, but that's the timeline.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And also I want to acknowledge how much hustle you've had to do because of the delays at the city council level. So thank you for all that extra work that was rushed. I'm sure at times it felt rushed to you. Can you break down the demographics of these responses by those who are current awardees and those who are not?
I can't currently, but that was sort of one of when I asked the question of what questions and curiosities do you have about these data, that's kind of what I was hoping to hear from you all. If there are things that you want us to look into in the data and bring back to you. So right now, Dan, I haven't done that analysis, but I hear that you want to understand how those results vary. Yes.
Thanks. So that's one that I would offer.
Yep.
And it seems as though some of the bigger changes of behavior are the ones that are getting the most criticism. And I've never experienced change not having that type of reaction. So it's, my lived experience would say zero surprise, which then is why I would ask the other question about further digging in on demographics.
I'm just curious when I read the question, if we could go back to the slide, bring the last slide up. Is that possible? The one that says, it says understand, I don't see it on mine. There it goes, okay. I understood the rationale, or understood is different than agree with, but I think, I wonder sometimes if people were like, and that's where the comments I think would be useful. Understanding it is different than agreeing with it. And if you don't understand it, then I want to know, okay, what can we do to help you understand the behind the scenes, very rigorous process that leads to the decision? You know, because we're sort of, they don't see a lot of us and behind the scenes, what we're doing in between these public meetings. And that's an understanding piece. Agreeing with, they might go together, they don't agree because they don't totally understand, or something needs to be done differently in terms of how we communicate our value in the process of decision-making and all the things that we take into account. So that's kind of what came up for me.
That's a great question, and I can certainly pay attention to that as I look at what those comments say. Are they suggesting they didn't understand and there's communication improvements that need to be made? Are they suggesting that they just, as you said, just didn't agree with what you decided, and that's a different kind of set of considerations, or is it a little bit of both?
Yeah, or even not agreeing with our decision, but agreeing with the process to get to the decision, you know, that we, so layers there. I know it's hard to tease those out, but I would be curious just so I can do my job better.
Thank you.
Thing.
Yep.
I wish this light was brighter, don't we all?
Okay.
Commissioner Moyer, do you have any questions? Oh, I can see you now. You're good. All right.
All right, then Katrina will share what she's heard so far from our community council folks.
Good to see you, Katrina. Welcome.
So as a reminder, the Community Council is composed of 13 volunteers, and they advise staff and you all on PCL policies and procedures. Demographic information-wise, 9 of 13 of them identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. 3 of the 13 identify as disabled, and 3 of the 13 identify as a member of the LGBTQIA2S+ community. Thanks, Joe. So up here you can see the role that the Community Council played in the large grants funding process, and this is why we wanted to get their feedback on it, because they played an integral role in it. And they met 13 times over 2 years to advise us. In 2013, the Community Council provided input on the priority populations and goals for community engagement. From 2023. From 2023 through 2024, they provided detailed feedback on the application questions and scoring criteria, and they recommended recruiting community volunteers for the grant review process. And then in 2024, they finalized the funding priorities, and in 2025, they informed and finalized the funding recommendations that went to you all for review and final decision making. So the Community Council met this past July 28th to debrief the 2024-2025 large grants funding process. As a part of and after that meeting, 10 of the 13 members submitted a written evaluation reflecting on the strengths and opportunities for change for Community Council participation in the large grants funding process. They also responded to the question of if they felt their voice was reflected in the outcomes of our work together, and they also provided any other feedback. So the high-level takeaways are listed on this slide. 9 of 10 respondents report feeling like their voice and perspective was heard by PCL staff and reflected in the outcomes of our work together. 7 of 10 respondents had ideas for how to improve the 2024-2025 large grants funding process. And some of these ideas included the desire to mitigate the influence of more politically connected or powerful organizations, the desire for more relationship building between City Council and the Portland Children's Levy to increase City Councilor understanding of the funding process and grantees, and ensuring that choices offered to Community Council are meaningful and distinct. And in this case, they were specifically referring to the March 3rd, 2025 meeting where we gave them a choice between a Portfolio A and a Portfolio B vote. 6 of 10 respondents appreciated how staff facilitated community council meetings and decision-making. They appreciated how the process was designed and invited the council to collaboratively reimagine the grant-making process. And they also appreciated how staff fielded city councilor questions and concerns. 4 of the 10 of them spoke to strengths, and those comments included appreciation for the process staff used to facilitate council prioritization of applications, increased accessibility and transparency, and how there was a balance struck between funding for current grantees with funding for organizations that hadn't previously received PCL funding. In addition, I conducted one-on-ones with 12 of the 13 community council members this past September to ask if they had any further feedback. 6 of 12 vocalized concern about how city council exercised their power in the large grants funding process and wondered how to adjust lobbying rules or mitigate the influence of politically connected organizations. PCL staff clarified that we had control over the advocacy and testimony process that occurs with staff, the community council, and the allocation committee, but that we have no influence or control over lobbying at city council. Staff asked if PCL should revise the testimony process with the allocation committee. 7 of 12 respondents recommended keeping the current testimony process as is. 3 of 12 didn't have any thoughts on this question or could see both sides, and the remaining 2 of 12 recommended reinstituting in-person testimony at the allocation committee decision-making meetings. So those are the themes from the community council. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about this stream of feedback.
I'm just trying to understand what maybe help me, understand what a no response means on some of these, like a 4 out of 10. I don't know if that's good or bad.
Sometimes it means like either if it's a written evaluation, it means there's literally a blank. Or sometimes someone will say NA or no comment. And then when I was doing my one-on-ones, they would say, I don't have any thoughts on this.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Just next steps from all this, I think goes back to Dan Floyd's question about kind of where are we headed with all this information. So just to bring it back, like I said, there were 50 applicant survey respondents who wrote comments. There were 18 out of the 44 reviewers who wrote comments. So we have theming to do of those, using kind of the type of methods that Katrina used to talk about what she heard from community council members. So we'll use those qualitative data to help us better understand, especially those neutral and disagree responses. We're going to theme across, so from applicants, reviewers, and community council, we're going to do some macro theming, like what are the things that are boiling up across all of these audiences. And then, like I said, schedule some individual meetings with you all to hear some of your specific feedback and provide some more information after we've done more theming analysis, and then create a final report that we can share to you all, the community council, and post to our website. And of course, what comes out of that will help inform how we structure changes for our next large grants funding process if the levy is reauthorized in the future. One other thing I want to note is that we'll also use relevant findings from this to include in a separate report that the allocation committee was directed to give to city council when council passed the ordinance that approved these grants back in June. So they directed the committee to address some of their specific concerns, and we as a staff will be helping prepare that and working with you to make that happen. And we'll be individually reaching out with you around those, that report as well. Any questions on next steps? Commissioner Moyer, anything? I see her shaking her head no. Okay. And I just was coming back to our questions for today. Is there anything else you want to raise? or make sure that we pay attention to as we do our last round of analysis.
I think that was very thorough, and I'm always impressed with how much engagement you do in process improvement. It's a best practice in local government, so thank you for lifting it.
Thank you, Councilor Ryan.
Any other questions, concerns, thoughts? Okay, I think we're on to the next item. Thank you so much, Katrina and Meg. Now coming up is the Director, Lisa Pellegrino. She'll give us an update on various City of Portland issues. Welcome, Lisa.
Thanks. Excuse me. Thanks, Commissioner Ryan, or Council Member Ryan. I'm still used to calling you Commissioner. I will say one editorial comment before going on the City of Portland invites updates. The lack of ability at the City of Portland any longer to offer any incentives to survey completers, which we used to offer, there's no way to really do that anymore, has impacted survey results in all quarters. We used to offer small incentives to complete, like you would do an online survey and you would get an online gift card to Starbucks or something like that. So being able to offer some kind of incentive, I think people have gotten quite accustomed to being incentivized. And so when you don't offer incentives, you get lower response rates. So that's something we've seen. Particularly, this is more outreach oriented, less about applicants, I would say, but that's just something to keep in mind.
That was very helpful to receive that feedback. Was that because of a budget cut?
No, that was because of city practice changes. You cannot offer any kind of gift card or any kind of incentive like that that is an online accessible item anymore. That's a financial
percent did you
practices
think-
decision.
What kind of impact did it have number-wise, do you think, on the outreach component?
I would say substantial, because we used to offer that to reviewers. We used to offer that to any kind of outreach survey to more the general population of organizations that might respond to something as opposed to people who are applying. I don't know that we offered it. Meg, can you correct me? Do we ever offer it to applicants? I don't know if we did. No, not applicants.
And we'd be able to give that to the operational chain of command that you're in right now, which now is,
I mean, I could try.
who's your DCA now? It's been hard to track.
Donnie Oliver.
Okay,
It's a financial practices decision. It's outside of what
let's talk
the DCA
offline. I
is.
want to make sure that you
Yeah,
can
I mean, it's
give
just,
that
it's a
information
practice
to
change
the
that we
powers that
noticed
be.
immediately, the difference.
Give that information to the powers that be, and I could be a CC in that email. That'd be
Okay,
helpful.
I will do that. Okay, on to other things going on at the City of Portland. First up is I wanted to make sure that folks, I think probably folks have read this in the paper, but I just want to make sure that our people are aware that on July 31st, Mayor Wilson issued an executive order that provides the following, and I will read it just so we're clear on what it said. Notwithstanding any conflicting provision of city code, city ordinance, city resolution, or bureau policy, and notwithstanding any contrary city bureau or bureau practice, city employees, programs, and services are required and directed to comply with all applicable federal civil rights non-discrimination laws, including but not limited to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. By complying with these laws, city programs and services will provide services, programs, and benefits without regard or preference based on protected class status, consistent with our ongoing commitment to complying with federal non-discrimination laws. And just so folks understand, federally protected classes that are referred to there include race, gender, and disability, among others. City services and programs are not permitted to provide preferences based on these categories. Program preferences for people experiencing poverty, living in a geography and/or attending a school with high poverty rates are permitted. So income qualified programs are permitted to continue using that qualification. The mayor directed the city administrator to work with city bureaus and offices to review programs and services for ongoing and continued compliance with the executive order, including undertaking disparity studies as appropriate to identify historical discriminatory actions taken by the city that continue to need remedy and repair. PCL has been directed to review and identify any policies and practices that may violate the terms of the executive order, and the city remains committed to pursuing equity, diversity, and inclusion goals through programs designed to help all Portlanders, including people of color, immigrants, women, people with disabilities, and those who identify as LGBTQIA2S+. PCL remains committed to eliminating racial and ethnic disparities in children's outcomes, as we have been focused on for the last 15 years. So I wanted to make sure that folks were updated on sort of the current situation that we are operating in, and no laws have been changed per se, because we were always subject to the Civil Rights Act, but how that gets interpreted changes over time. So next slide. Moving on to other updates that are affecting PCL. So I'm confining this to things that are affecting our operations and on how we do our business. So as of July 1st, I think we told you about this perhaps on our last, in our June meeting. PCL has joined the Community and Economic Development Service Area, which we call CEDSA for short. Doesn't have a lot of ring to it. But that's what we are currently operating in. So with that change in the form of government, all city bureaus and offices, and that includes the Office of the Children's Levy, are assigned to one service area or another. So we, as of July 1, we are now participating in all of those teams. We are meeting regularly for budget preparation, modification, communications, and leadership. We are integrated into those teams now, so after this first quarter. And that was who Commissioner Ryan was referring to, so my boss changes and, those kind of how PCL reports up through the structure. Along with some of those changes that are happening centrally, the city's currently implementing a realignment of communications personnel and structures across all city bureaus and offices under a chief communications officer. Under the new structure, PCL communications staff will report to a media and strategic communications manager for CEDSA, and that staff will no longer report to me as the director. Plan changes are supposed to take effect before the end of this calendar year. And whether and how much these changes will affect PCL financially is not yet clear. We've not been informed. There is a similar realignment process that's moving forward for community engagement personnel and structures across, again, all city bureaus, all city offices. Under the city has a new chief engagement officer. PCL is in the process of providing input to that senior leadership as they plan the structural and reporting changes across the city. At this point, we don't know how PCL community engagement staff will be affected or if there will be any fiscal or financial effect to us yet. So we are staying tuned and we'll keep you all in the loop as those processes move forward. As part of the community engagement realignment, so there's a chief engagement officer, as I just referred to, they are also undertaking an advisory bodies enhancement process. The project leaders there are working with advisory board liaisons across the city to classify all the city advisory boards, because there are many. You are just one of 150 probably at least, and create guidelines for establishing these advisory boards, operating them, recruiting and confirming appointments of members, what the service expectations are, and the dissolution of boards. So they're trying to standardize and kind of get that all written and put together and create some agreement around it. We are participating in the work group, in the stakeholder work group, and providing feedback to those project leaders about that as it relates to this board here, which is required in the PCL Act that was passed by the voters, as well as it applies to the Community Council. So that's kind of like a lot of processes that are happening in the background and affecting our staff and affecting how the city will be organized and how we will report up and kind of how we will do our business. So we'll kind of keep you updated regularly as there is change, so you're kind of in the know of where the city is heading on these things. And then finally, I'm sure you read this one in the papers for sure. Last month, the city had announced that revenues were expected to decline by an additional $16 million in this current fiscal year. So as you might have been aware, there were budget cuts. I'm sure Commissioner Ryan was highly aware of the budget cuts that had to be made in the budget process. And it looks like more budget cuts will be required to manage for this deficit. And Commissioner Ryan, you can tell me if anything has changed since I've been given that news. We don't know how that deficit will affect PCL exactly, just because it's likely to affect staffing throughout the city. But we will keep you posted. And if you have any further update or anything I'm missing there, please go right ahead.
I think what I would add is it is different because we have kind of a lockbox in terms of the revenue that comes in. We have been hit at the Children's Levy because of declining revenue that's coming from a tax base that's depleted in comparison to what projections were. So there's some parallel tracks as well as some safety lockboxes because this is a designated account, not designated, restricted. That's different. It's a restricted account within the accounting procedures of the city.
And we won't get our updated revenue projection usually till December.
In
So,
December, that
yeah,
was what I
that's
was going to ask
typically-
you.
Yeah, that's what's coming for the levies.
Getting a bit in the weeds because, well, you offered them a bit. So your comms person, your engagement professionals, if I was hearing that right, and will they then be reporting to a different person and not yourself and your team here?
Communication staff, yes, will be reporting up to a different person. They will be embedded in our bureau, so as I understand it, still working in our bureau, but they report to a different manager in the SEDSA structure.
And with the earlier comments about the restricted nature of our funding and the way that you allocate funds of that restricted revenue for these expenses, has that been factored in to this conversation as this is an apples and apples, there's an apple and orange comparison here, I believe?
They are aware of that. How
Keep
they're
me
gonna-
posted, please.
I will keep you posted.
Thanks.
Any other questions on these changes at the city and how they're playing out across the levy? Okay. Now we're
It
wrapping up.
was,
Thank you.
all the reports today have been so clear and crisp, and they're pique our curiosity because we're passionate about your work, so thank you. Does that bring us to the end of this meeting? I want to just say a couple things. I'm going to be really careful here. We're all aware that we're distracted by the federal overreach, if I could just be safely say it like that. And it's really important for the city, county, all of us in local leadership to stay focused on doing the work. So we can't allow the distraction to not keep us focused on moving the work forward. So it was an absolute pleasure for me to sit in a meeting for, I don't know how long it's been, about 90 minutes on a topic that was about taking care of our children and families here in Portland, an empowerment system that we've made locally that's separate from that federal overreach, albeit some mentions earlier about some adjustments that you've had to do to language from that. But I just want to applaud city staff and also the county staff, the local public servants who are showing up to do their work for the city and for the county. It means a lot to take a break from that conversation, which has been every day, a lot of hours over the last couple of weeks. And I'm sure my friend and colleague, Commissioner Megan Moyer, is agreeing with some of these comments, and I appreciate that. So I should offer you the floor as well for a second, or for as many minutes as you'd like.
No, I just want to compliment staff on what a thorough job you do preparing us as an allocation committee, but also throughout the process. I know that often you only hear cranky voices, but I did not want to go through this and not thank you for the level of professionalism and the support you're giving us throughout this.
Okay, my friends. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. The agendas for future meetings will be sent to the Levy email list. It's shared on our Facebook page at PDX Kids Levy and posted on portlandchildrenslevy.org. We do welcome your participation. I failed to ask if we had any public testimony the entire meeting. You would have told me. All right. We welcome your participation. If you'd like to join us at the next meeting, what's the date of the next meeting? What's that? Stay tuned. And I just want to say you can always, again, visit us at portlandchildrenslevy.org and join our email list. Thank you all so much. Thank you again, staff, for your professionalism. And this meeting's now adjourned. Did you drive?
Drive?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You dropped me off at City Hall.
Yeah, of course.
I'm late for,
Oh, there you go.
but I'm okay. I mean, I knew I was going to be late.
No problem.
You can't be two places at once.
Is this gavel working for you?
Sorry. I don't even know if anyone can hear it.
The toy gavel?
I try to do it near the. I try to do it near the microphones. Kind of feels good. Like right now, anything.